Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Eruvin Nun Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Alexander in honor of her mother, Sheila Alexander. When mom created the Jewish Day School 40 years ago, would she ever have thought that I would be learning Daf Yomi at age 47? It's a good indicator of all the unexpected people that are now learning Daf Yomi. And by Caroline Offstein in honor of Yakir's bar mitzvah, and for Refuah Shlema to Shendo Chaya Bat Leah B'toch Sha'ar Cholei Yisrael. Okay, we have a bit of an out there daf. Okay, if we had I got a tot the other day, and today is going to be all about, or much of it about, constellations and things that I have to admit from the beginning I do not understand properly well enough. And in addition, we're going to have some issues about mathematical calculations that at least I have a little bit of a better grasp on. Okay, so with that, we'll get started. We're going to start from the bottom, and we're going to start off with some interesting statements about vegetables. So Amar Rav Huna, Kol Ir, if you remember, we ended, just to remind you, I don't know if you recall, but we ended with this idea of people who live in srifim, in huts, and how it's not recommended to live in huts. Once they're talking about places it isn't recommended, they're now going to talk about other places where maybe are recommended to or to not, etc. We will see. So the first statement is, Rav Huna, Kol Ir she'en ba yerek, ein tamid chacham rashai lador ba. Okay, any place where there's vegetables, okay, I'm sorry, that doesn't have vegetables, a Talmid Chacham shouldn't live there, because vegetables are good, healthy foods that can sustain the Talmid Chacham. What's the idea? The Talmid Chacham doesn't have time to sit and work all the time and make his own food. So he needs food that's going to basically be healthy for him and it's going to keep him going. So you basically need vegetables. Okay, that sounds very nice. But now the Gemara is going to question this. Lamemra de yerek ma'alya? Do we really think that vegetables are good for you? There's three things that cause a lot of waste in the body and cause one to be bent down and take away 1/500th of your sight. Okay, it's interesting because we always say carrots are good for your vision. Here they're saying that vegetables are going to be on the list of things that are bad for your vision and other things. Ve'eloheim, what are the following three things? Pat kevar, okay, this is again something we believe is very healthy, which is all the bread that's not sifted properly, right? The whole wheat, okay, with all the extra stuff in it. They thought that that was bad. V'shechar chadash, new beer that hasn't fully fermented. V'yerek, and vegetables. So here you see they're not good. So what do you mean? You should live in a place where there's vegetables. They're considered not good. So they say, lo kashya, ha betume bekarte, ha b'shar yarke. There's a distinction between garlic and leeks and all other vegetables. Which is the distinction? Which way does it go? Surprisingly, Rashi brings both approaches. Rashi says, what I learned was, Kach Shamati says that tume and karte are not healthy for you. However, he quotes some other Gemara, which seems to indicate that they are good for you, and therefore he switches from what he learned. Generally, Rashi goes with the Perushim of his rabbis. But here he basically differs, and he says it doesn't make any sense that would be the case, and it must be the garlic and leeks are the healthy ones, and everything else is not. And now they're going to say, how do we know this? Even though we're going to see this Braita doesn't necessarily prove either way. Kedetanya shum yerek, chishin chatzi yerek. Shum is a vegetable, and leeks are half a vegetable. So according to Rashi's explanation, the way you'd understand this is shum is the best kind of yerek, and leeks have half the nutritional value of them, which means it's still good, but not as good as garlics, but they're still in the good category. And then they add a third one, which he didn't mention, which is niretz no niretz sam chayim. You see radishes, that's a sign of life. Okay, that's good. That's a drug of life. V'hatanya, but now they're going to just point out something with the end of the Braita that seems problematic. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in the Braita, niretz no niretz sam amavet? If you see tznon, it's actually the kiss of death. So, lo kasha kam ba'alin kam b'imho. There's a difference between the leaves and the vegetable itself. The vegetable itself is very healthy. It's the leaves that are problematic. Or kam b'yimot chama, kam b'yimot kshamim. There was this assumption that radishes somehow cooled your body, so therefore it's good in the summer, but it's bad in the winter months. Amar Rabbi Yehud Amar Rav. So now the first thing is you should live, if you're a Talmid Chacham, you should live in a place where there's vegetables. The second thing they're going to tell you is look out for altitude or different heights. Amar Rav Yehud Amar Rav, kol ir sheyesh ba ma'alot u'moradot, adam u'behema sheba metim b'chatzi yemehen. There's a lot of like highs and lows, and you have to go up and then you go down. A lot of that in your city, people die chatzi yemim, okay? They live only half the amount of life, the half the amount of time they should be living. So the Gemara says, mitim salkadata, what? That causes people to die? Obviously, they saw this and they didn't really see people dying from this. It causes people to prematurely age, okay? I'm not exactly sure why they thought this. I don't think it's proven to be the case, that that's the case, but you would think it would actually make you healthier because you get used to walking ups and downs and all that. So it's a little bit of a strange sugya. We'll kind of put it out there, like a lot of things we're going to have to put out there today that we're not going to really fully understand. Amar Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua. Hani mulyata, now he basically proves this. Hani mulyata debe biri udebe narash is kinun, okay? Because of the mulyata, the ups and downs that were in the cities of Bebiri and Beinarish caused us to get old, okay? So basically, maybe this is another situation where they're trying to find the causes of all sorts of things that people see around. Why do people age younger than other people or in certain cities? So maybe they were trying to give this as a reason, not exactly clear. Okay, back to, but we're not exactly really back to our topic of when we had a city that was the shape of a circle. And now when you want to do the tchum, you draw first a square around the city, you square out the city, and then you draw your tchum around the city. So soon, later in the daf, on the second side, we're going to get to all the measurements. But here we're going to talk about, so we quote a braita, Bali Rab'ah, when you go to make the square around the city, mirab'ah b'ribua olam. Remember we talked about ribua olam. Ribua olam means the way the directions go, north, south, east, west. So each side is going to match, right? Draw it north and not northeast or northwest or something like that, right? Draw your lines, or not, both northeast, northwest, south, west, southeast, in a diamond. No, draw it the way, right? The whole one line should be on the south side, one line on the north, etc. So he says, noten safona litzfon olam, the northern one you're going to draw, again, it's not really drawing a line, but you're going to kind of measure it out, will be to the northern side of the world, udaroma lidrom olam, and southern side to the southern side of the wall. V'simanech, now how do you know north and south? Assuming you don't have a compass, how do you know where north is and how do you know where south is? So the Tanna Kama is going to give us one sign and then Rabbi Yossi is going to give us a different sign. And here's where things are going to get a little bit complicated. Eglav et safon v'akrav b'darom. Okay, Eglaz, Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper, is in the north, and Akrav, Scorpion, is in the south. So basically, follow the stars. The stars will tell you where, what's north, what's south, the constellations. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ime no yodea l'rava b'ribua shel olam. If you don't know the stars, you're not familiar with what all the stars are, because not all of us are. Well, what do? Mirab'a keminat kufa. You use the times of year to help you determine this. Ketzad. We all know that the sun rises on the east and sets on the west. So what do we say here? Ketzad chama yotza b'yom aroch v'shokat b'yom aroch zeu pnei tzafon. The idea here is that even though it goes east-west, in the longer days of the year, it's going to be on the northern side, right? We all know, again, they're describing it as if the earth is stable in the middle and the sun moves. We obviously know it's the reverse, but basically just assume we're taking the earth as our starting point. So the sun will be viewed from earth on the northern face of things. It'll basically rise and set on the northern side. Okay, although we'll see exactly, we're going to get into a little more detail, but right now it goes out b'yom aroch v'shokat b'yom aroch zeu pnei tzafon. So it's more on the northern side. Chama yotza b'yom katzar v'shokat b'yom katzar zeu pnei darom. Okay, in the winter months, it's going to be more toward the south. And basically the idea is that it moves southward, right, from the longest day of the year. It's going to then start moving slowly toward the south. In the middle, it'll end up smack center. That's what they're going to say now. Tkufat Nisan u'tkufat Tishrei, when we're talking, right, in the fall and the spring. Chama yotza b'chatzi mizrach v'shokat b'chatzi ma'arav. It's right in the center. Shneimar, where do we get this from? From Kohelet that we read yesterday. Holech el darom v'sovev el tzafon. Okay, there's a verse in, I'll read the whole pasuk. It goes to the south and turns toward the north. Sovev, sovev, holech haruach. Right, it continually turns. Va'al svivotav shav haruach. Okay, and on its turns, it goes back. Okay, so they basically say this is describing the way the sun, again, the sun moves, even though it's not the sun, but from our perspective. So holech el darom v'sovev al tzafon, what does that mean? Holech el darom bayom. Okay, now they're going to say this actually means something a little more, which is it's on the southern side in the day, v'sovev al tzafon balayla. Okay, this is if you're in the northern hemisphere, because that's where they all were. They're only describing the northern hemisphere. It's seen on the southern side during the day, and then it turns on the northern side at night. So you don't see it on the northern side when it's going at night. Sovev holech haruach. What does that second part mean? Elu pnei mizrach upnei ma'arav, pa'amim mahalachtan upamim misavavtan. Okay, sometimes, okay, they're going to explain what this means is that sometimes you see it cross the line of mizrach ma'arav. Okay, sometimes the sun will start in the south and go toward the north, and it'll start southeast and end up northwest the end of the day, and you'll see it cross the line of east-west. And sometimes you won't see it. Sometimes it'll stay in the south and it won't actually cross the line until it's nighttime, and then you won't see it. Okay, so that's what it's saying here. That's kind of in a nutshell. Okay, I'm not getting more into details because I don't fully understand it, so I will leave it at that. But we're still continuing. An Amarav Misharshia Litnu Ulane Klale. He says, no, this is not actually true what you just said. Where Rabbi Yossi just said, Ditanya lo yatzah chama me'olam mekerem mizrachit tzfonit v'shak'a bekerem ma'arabit tzfonit v'lo yatzah chama mekerem mizrachit dromit v'shak'a bekerem ma'arabit dromit. It never, you described before, is that sometimes it never crosses the line of east-west. It never happens. It never starts in the northern side and sets in the northern side, or starts in the southern side and sets in the southern side. It always, during the day, somehow crosses over from one to the other, and therefore what you said at the end there isn't accurate. Okay. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel was known to be a scientist in those days and knew a lot about the stars and the months, etc., the seasons. And they believed that the year was 365 and a quarter days. Right? We now know it's a bit of a fraction off of that. That's why we have a leap year, right, every 4 years, but there's always a correction, right? I forget, is it every 100 years where we have a correction and there's no leap year, or am I totally off? I forget, but there's, right, I think it's every 100 years. Right, it's every 100 years, unless it's divisible, it's a century that's divisible by 4, and then it does have a leap year. But there's basically a correction. This was on the Gregorian calendar. One year they skipped 11 days in the calendar because they realized that they had to make a big correction. And it affects, by the way, halachot. We'll get to it when we get to Ta'anit, in terms of V'tein Talo Matar Livracha, which we're supposed to be, say, 60 days after the equinox, after the, I forget what you call it's basically after Tkufat Tishrei, which is what's it called? The autumnal equinox. So it's supposed to be 60 days after that, which should end in November, basically the end of November. But we do it December 4th or 5th because we still really do it November. It's just the calendar jumped forward. We go by the old, okay? And the calendar really jumped forward X number of days, and that's why it's off. Anyway, that's a whole other topic we'll get to when we get to Masechet Ta'anit. But basically, being and basically he wants to tell us this number. He's going to tell it in a kind of complicated way. But if you get that, we're going to get to, you should start with the last line, which is, I'm just going to drop down to 4 lines from the end of this side of the page. Ein bein tkufa l'tkufa, okay, because it's 365 and a quarter days, each tkufa, each season, okay, is going to be tish'im ve'echad yom ve'sheva sha'ot b'mechza. Okay, if you divide 365 and a quarter into 4, you're going to get to 91 days and 7.5 hours. Okay, so now he's going to say all these things about this number. Ein tkufat nisan nofelet ela ba'arba'a riv'ei hayom. Okay, in the 4 quarters of the day, o b'tchilat hayom, o b'tchilat halayla, o b'chatzi hayom, o b'chatzi halayla. It's always going to come out either in the beginning of the day, the beginning of the night, or halfway. And then based on that is going to be the next one. Ve'ein tkufat Tammuz, by the way, this sugya assumes that the world was created in Nisan, and the world was created on Wednesday, right? The constellations, the moon and the sun were created on Wednesday, and therefore it's always going to be on a Wednesday, and then it's just going to depend what time of day it is, because it's always going to change a little bit every year. So, but it's always going to be at the beginning of a section. Then, Ein tkufat Tammuz nofelet ela o be'echat b'mechza o b'sheva b'mechza. Right now, we're going to basically take that and add 7.5 hours. It's always going to be 7.5 hours later than that one, right? O be'echat b'mechza o b'sheva b'mechza. So again, right, either in 1.5 hours or 7.5 hours, bein bayom bein balayla, whether it's into the day or into the night. And then let's just keep going. Ein Tkufat Tishrei Nofelet, the next season is Ela Oba Shalosh Oba Tesha Sho, right? Add another 7.5 to there. You're going to get to either 3 hours into the day or 9 hours. Bein B'yom Bein Balayla, either into the day or into the night. Ve'ein Tkufat Tevet Nofelet Ela Oba Arba V'mechza Oba Eser V'mechza Bein B'yom Bein Balayla. This is just simple math, adding each time 7.5 hours. Ve'ein Bein Tkufa L'Tkufa, and this is what we already read. Ela Tish'im Be'echad Yom V'sheva Shel V'mechza. Ve'ein Tkufa Moshechet Mechaverta Ela Chatzi Sha'ah. What does that mean? What do you mean, Chatzi Sha'ah? We just said it's 7.5 hours, not half an hour. This goes back to something that we said before about the months being, we said that the planets, remember we said that there's 7 planets or constellations that rule, and each one rules for an hour, and it's basically a cycle that it keeps going over the same hours, and there's always one that's ruling at a particular time. We had a whole discussion about this twice in Masechet Shabbat. And then we said that since there's 7, it's a cycle of 7. So basically, and each one starts, the first hour of the day is 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So each one, what they mean here is, it's always going to be one whole constellation, one whole section of 7, plus, and it would always be a half an hour later than the end of where that group of that stars finished. Okay, so they'll basically saying there's the group of 7, and then it's always a half an hour after that. Va'amar Shmuel, the last statements he makes about this kind of thing, which is, these are signs of bad luck or it's going to be a bad year. If Jupiter is ruling exactly when Tkufat Tevet comes out, when the Tkufat Nisan, when the summer months, the spring comes out, the spring equinox, it's called the vernal equinox. If that happens, it's going to, in Jupiter, it's basically going to break all the trees. It's bad for the trees. And if the winter months come out, the winter winter solstice happens in Jupiter, it's a sign that everything's going to dry out. But he narrows the focus, he limits this a little. It's only if the moon came up, specifically during the time of the moon or during the time of Jupiter. Okay, these are signs. Again, this was Shmuel who knew all about the stars and the planets and different signs. These are bad signs that would happen. Okay, finished with the constellations that like I said, I don't fully understand. Now we're moving on to calculations. Okay, so Tanu Rabbanan. Hamerabea et ha'ir. Okay, now I'm going to bring up pictures. Oh, I lost the pictures here. 1 minute. I'm going to bring up pictures. 1 minute. Okay. So here come our pictures. Okay, now we want to get to how do we measure out the city, and this, when we get to our limits, our 2,000 amma, how is everything measured? And we're going to talk about specifically when we have a circle, a city in the shape of a circle. Tanu Rabbanan, hamerabea et ha'ir. So the first thing we said is the directions go according to the directions north, south, east, west. That's how we got into that whole long discussion. Now we're going to say, how do we do this? So oseh ota kemin tavla merubat. So you make basically, okay, the way I like to describe this is like a tic-tac-toe board. That's the easiest way to imagine it. The city's in the center, and then we basically end up with these 8 squares around. Then you make, that's the right, first you square off the city, that was the first thing. Then you basically square off the tchumim. So you make these squares all around. Okay, you make it like a tablet. You don't want the diagonal. And what do you mean 2,000 amma? It could be either each of the sides of the squares that we're adding are 2,000 amma, or the diagonal could be 2,000 amma. So they're saying don't measure the diagonal 2,000 amma because you're going to lose the angles. So you're going to basically bring a square that's 2,000 by 2,000. And then you put them in the corners on a diagonal from, basically this means the 4 corners of the tic-tac-toe board, you're going to add a square. That's 2,000 by 2,000, which again, based on the Pythagorean theorem, you're going to end up with the angle or the diagonal is going to be 2,800 amot. So now they tell you, Now, the city, how much do you gain in the city? Well, again, the city is, okay, now, they didn't tell you this, but you have to assume that our city is 2,000 amma. Otherwise, this calculation doesn't make sense. And just like with the previous sugya where I read the last line first, we really should read the last line first here, which is Abaye says, by the way, this bright is talking about a city that's 2,000 amma in diameter. Okay, the diameter of the city is 2,000. Otherwise, the numbers don't work, but that's what they're basically basing it on. So again, if the diagonal of the city, the diameter is 2,000 amma, then the diagonal is going to be 2,800, which basically means that each corner is going to give you an extra 400 amot, because in every half, you're going to have 400 here and 400 there. So that's going to get you to 800. So basically, if you take, let's say, the center of the city and you draw a line going all the way outside the city, so you have your 1,000 amma in your city, right? Because it's basically the radius of the circle. Now we're going to add to that to get all the way to the farthest corner. How much you're going to add? 400 that you gained in the corners of the square that we drew around the city itself. That's 400. And then you get another, right, your 2,000, which you were going to get anyway, and your extra 800 in your corner of the upper one, or whatever direction you go in. But the extra, again, if we imagine this is all circles, so each circle is going to get you, and each corner is going to get you, one is 400 and 800 in each of the corners. So basically what they're going to say, I'll read it inside now. So nimtzeit ha'ir mistakeret, you get a sachar, you get rewarded, you get extra. What do you get extra? Arba me'ot amot lekan, v'arba me'ot amot lekan. In every direction, the city gets 400 amot. Nimtzeu tchumin mistakrim, and the tchum, the borders around the city, all the extra spaces that you get, the tchum Shabbat, you're going to get shmona me'ot amot lekan v'shmona me'ot lekan. You're getting an extra 800 there because, again, of the diagonal, which adds an extra 800. So the amount of extra that you're getting in the city, because it's a circle shape, and because of that, you're going to get extra circle around the city and extra circle around the tchum, you end up with an extra 1,200 amot. Okay, that's how much extra you get in addition to the 2,000 cubits that you got already. And that's where Amar Abaye now explains, now that we finished the Braita, okay, and this is only in a city that's 200 by 200. Okay, that's our measurement of how we measure. We're done with this, but we're not done with measurements, because if already we're talking about measurements and cities that have borders around them and 2,000 amma of space around that they get, we're now going to move to the cities of the Levium. We talked about that the Levium have 48 cities that were designated as Levite cities because they didn't get Nachala like all the other tribes got. They're spread out throughout the country, and 6 of them are the Ir Miklat, the refuge cities. So now we learned already these 2 contradictory psukim where it said in Bamidbar Lamed Hey, in Pasuk Dalet and Pasuk Hey. In Pasuk Dalet it said, and we're going to read this pasuk in a minute, so I'll read it right now. Umigrashe haleviim asher titnu leleviim, and the migrash, the area around the city, mikir ha'ir b'chutza 1,000 amma saviv. You get 1,000 amot around, but then it said you have 2,000 amma around. So what does it mean? So we're going to see right now. Tanya Amar Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi, tchum arei leviim 2,000 amma. The border around the city is 2,000. Say mehen 1,000 amma migrash, take away 1,000 of the migrash, nimtza migrash revia, this is going to be a very difficult line, the migrash turns out to be 1/4 of the space, v'hashar sadotu kramim, and the rest of it is fields and vineyards. Okay, what this basically means, in other words, forget about the measurements right now, this simply means that, and this is what we described the other day, the space immediately around the city of the Levite cities was meant to be left with nothing. Okay, partly they say it was maybe for decorative, like for beauty purposes, that you don't have fields the second you walk out the city. And then the 1,000 amot outside of that were left for fields and vineyards. Okay, like we talked about many times, that outside the cities, that's where they had their fields. So the Arei Leviim had the specific border of 1,000 without anything, that's called the migrash, and then another 1,000. Now, then they tell us, and this is where we're going to have to figure out the calculation, and we'll start today with 2 options, and we'll find a few more options in tomorrow's daf, which is, how could it possibly be Revia? So the Gemara first starts off and says, Minani Mile, where do we get this whole thing anyway of this 2,000 and 1,000, or particularly the 1,000? Amarava Damarka, in this we already read, Mikir ha'ir v'chutza 1,000 amma saviv, Amra Torah savevet ha'ir be'elef, right? And then the Torah said, put 1,000 around the city. That's how they understand this pasuk. Nimtza, and that's migrash. Nimtza migrash revia. Okay, so now we're going to go back to this line. Nimtza migrash revia. What do you mean? Revia palgahave. Let's do simple math. 1,000 amma for the migrash, and 2,000 amma for the whole space of outside the city. So 1,000 over 2,000 is half. That's not a quarter. So how do we get to a quarter? So Amarava, Bar Ada Mishocha'a, the surveyor Bar Ada, Esberali, he explained it to me, right? Who's the best person to explain these mathematical calculations? The surveyors. They know how to do this. Mishkachala b'mata dahavia tre alfe atre alfe. Okay, where do we find this? In a city that's 2,000 by 2,000, okay? And this is why it's similar to what we just described before. If you have a city that's 2,000. This time we're going to start the city's a square, okay? At least we're going to start that the city is a square. We'll see later that maybe not. But right now the city is a square 2,000 by 2,000. So we'll go through the calculations. Tchum kamahavia. So if you go now outside the area, tchum, okay, the tchum is always going to be the space immediately going north, south, east, west from that space. So if it's 2,000, the width of the tchum is going to be 2,000, the width of the city, and we're going to go out 2,000. So each one is a basic square of 2,000 by 2,000. So we now add 4 more squares of 2,000, okay, by 2,000. How much is that, right? Tchum kamahavia shitzar. It's going to be 16 what? 16 million square cubits, because each one, right, this is simple math, each one is 2 by 2, right, 2,000 by 2,000, which comes out to 4 million. And we have 4 squares like that. If you imagine the tic-tac-toe board, right, it's not the corners and not the center. The center is the city. The corners are the corners. It's the other, right, the other 4 going out from the center. You can see it in picture number 204. So now you go out 400 amot. So sorry, I'm back to here. Okay, kranot kamahavian. How much are the corners now? So it's the exact same 4 squares of 4 million square cubits each. So again, how many are you going to have? 16, shitzar. So now you have 16 plus 16 is this whole area. So you now have 32 million square cubits. How much is the tchum of 1,000? So now we want to get to the 1,000 around. How much is that? Dal timnaya de tchumin va'arba'a de kranot. Now, if you do 1,000 amma outside the city, so again, we start with the tchum. Now here it's going to not be exactly like a tic-tac-toe board, because here we're going out 1,000, but since the city is 2,000 by 2,000, you have to go out with a length or a width, whichever way you say it, of 2,000 outwards. So each box here is not going to be a square shape. It's going to be a rectangle of 2,000, the width of the city, but only by 1,000 because we want to get to the migrash. So you now have 4 squares of 2,000 by 1,000. So each of those are 2 million times 4, you're going to get to 8 million. So that's 8 million. That's the tchumin. But you also, in the migrash, you get the corners. So another 4, arba de kranot, that's another 4 million, because each of the corners is only 1,000 by 1,000, because they're just corners. Again, you can see this very well in the picture 204. And then what do you get to? So now we had 32, and now we added 8 plus 4, that's 12. Okay, now you're thinking that's still not a quarter, right? 12 out of 32 is not even a third, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. So it's as if they kind of figured it all out, right? They say, but again, nimtza migrash revia, tfei mitalta ninu. That's less than a third. 12 out of 32, that doesn't make any sense. So they say, wait a minute, you forgot about what? It's not that the tchum the migrash compared to the tchum where the fields are is one quarter. It's the entire space, including the city. So you have to add another 4 million of the city itself, because it's 2,000 by 2,000. That's 4 million. So they say aite arba ademata, right? So add another 4 million, shade alayu, and then you get yet another 4 of the city. So what does that get us up to? 12 out of 36. That's very nice. That gets us to a third, but it doesn't get us to a quarter. Akate tiltahavi. It's still only a third. So what do they say? Wait a minute. Next picture. Look at picture number 205. Oh, wait a minute. This wasn't a square city. Mi savart ribua kamar. Why do you think we were talking about a square city? Bi'igula kamar. It was a round city. Now, if it's a round city, one thing you have to learn is that the tchum is also going to be around the migrash. Okay, so we're going to have, again, you have the city, the migrash, which is the 1,000 amot around the city, which is the whole thing that we're saying is a quarter. That those are both going to be round. Okay, we're going to assume the 1,000 around the city are going to be round just like the city, but the 2,000 tchum space that you get around the city, that's going to be square. So now let's go back to our numbers. We said the entire square that we got to this whole big tic-tac-toe board was 36 million square cubits. Now we said that the migrash was 12. Okay, but now if we're going to say it's a circle of that, how much is it going to be? Kama meruba yeter al igul revia. Remember our whole thing about pi, not exactly pi according to them, right? It's 3 quarters instead of 3.14, whatever, it's 3. And therefore, how much is a square more than a circle? It's a quarter more. So dal revia mina, you take off 1/4 of 12. What does that get you to? Pasha lehu tisha, you're left with 9. V'tisha mitaltim b'shita, riva have. And what's 9 out of 36? Perfect, a quarter. Okay, so that's how we've gotten to our measurement of a quarter. So we're going to say the tchum. So now again, it's not that not the tchum. I keep saying the tchum because it says tchum here. It's the migrash, the empty space, as compared to the entire space, including the boundaries around the city of the 2,000 cubits. If you measure just that space of the migrash, the empty space, that's going to be a quarter of the total space, including the city, including the migrash, and including the outside borders. Okay, that's Rava. Abaye Amar, and we're going to go a little bit more into tomorrow's daf. Abaye Amar, mishkacha lanami b'mata dahavya alpha ba'alpha. He says, I can give you, it's not that he's disagreeing with Rava, he's saying, I could give you another situation where the city is 1,000 amot by 1,000 amot instead of 2,000. And we're now going to do the whole calculation again, but based on a city that's 1,000 by 1,000. So it's going to come out a little different. Like I said, this is not going to be like a tic-tac-toe board now because you're going to end up, the tchumim, the squares on the outside are 2,000 because you get 2,000 outside the city. But the space that's directly opposite the city, and as the corners are going to be 2,000 by 2,000. But when you go out of the city in every direction, okay, like the cross part, right, like the plus sign of the tic-tac-toe board, when you go out there, you're going to go out each time only the width of the city, which is 1,000 cubits, but you're going to go out a distance of 2,000 cubits. So each of those are going to be 2 by 1 instead of the 2 by 2 squares that we had in the previous case. So let's go through. Tchumin kamahavyan, timnaya. So now the tchum, each time you're going to go out 2,000 by 1,000. So each of those is going to be 2 million. Multiply that by 4 in all 4 directions. You're going to go out 2 million. That's going to give you 8 million. Kranot kamahavya. Now the corners are still going to be, because at the end you're going to end up with a square, and you're going to go out, right? Those are basically going to be 2,000 by 2,000. Again, it's very visual if you see it in the picture number 206. So that's 200, right? If in case, I'll just remind people, if you don't have the picture book, right, I post them every day on the site and on the details of the podcast, except for Spotify, which doesn't have details of podcasts. All the other podcasts have details, and in the details, I put the picture, the link to the pictures, so you can find it there, or on the website. There's a button on every day's page where it says pictures. So they'll really help you for this. Okay, so tchumin are 8 kranot, and how many in each corner is, remember, 2 by 2, which is 4 million. Each is 4 million, and there's 4 of them. So you're going to end up with 16 million. So the tchumin were 8. The kranot were 16 million. Because remember, the tchumin were those 4 parts that jut out like the plus sign. There were 2 by 1 each one. So that was 8. Then we have the 4 by 4 squares, which are, the 2 by 2 squares all around, 2,000 by 2,000, which come out to 4 squares of 4 million square cubits. That's going to give you 16 million square cubits. So now the whole space, other than this, right? This whole space is now 8 plus, here, by the way, he's not counting the city, but I just want you to notice, because the whole space is now 8 by 24, 8 plus 16, which gets you up to 24 million square cubits. Now, dal arba de tchumin, now we want to take away the migrash. What's around the city? Well, now you're going to have a perfect square of, right, you're going to have 8 squares around. You're going to have 4 of tchumin and 4 of corners, right? 4, it juts out each one 1,000 by 1,000 amma in each direction, and then you have the four corners to fill that in to get to a square. Kamahavye timnaya. So now you have 8 out of 24. That sounds very nice, but you're still not at a quarter. So now they say, tiltahavu, right? So they say, havitimnaya tiltahavu, that's a third. That's not a quarter. So they say, again, misavar biribua ka'amar bi'igula ka'amar. They weren't talking about a square again. They were talking about a rounded city. And again, if the city's round, then the migrash is going to be round also. So again, what did we say? The migrash was 8. Kama miruba yeter alegul revia. So take down a quarter. You're going to end up with 6. Dal revia pashaluhu shita. You're going to be left with 6. V'shita mikafdalid rivahave. And 6 out of 24 is a quarter. Okay, so that's how we get to our mathematical equation. And we end up saying that, again, this migrash was a circle. I don't have the picture here because the pictures go by days and I'm already into tomorrow's daf. But imagine this with a circle, and it's just going to be, again, you're going to have a circle around the city, because obviously the city itself was a circle, and then you're going to end up a quarter less, and that's going to get you to 6, which is going to be 6 out of 24. Like I said, the difference between this and the previous is in the previous one, we counted the city as part of the total space, and here they're not counting the city itself. Okay, we'll get to, as I said, more explanations tomorrow. Okay, and we'll see some other explanations of how we can get to this. With that, Mo'adim l'simcha, everybody, and have a great day.